This is DreamWorks' amazing How to Train Your Dragon. And I think there's no real debate around saying that the original How to Train Your Dragon is truly one of the great modern classics in animation. And like any animated classic, it's getting the full live action treatment.
Yay!
As now DreamWorks are making their first foray into soulless remakes. I love that. Although to be honest, I kind of foolishly have a little bit of hope for this one. I don't know. It's almost like you could use the Disney live-action remakes as a perfect 15-year training sequence of how not to do a remake, you know? And when you've got the original creators coming on board with a passion for the projects again, there's room for something nice and new. Whatever the case, I think we can all agree that regardless of how good that is, it's still unlikely to top the original, which is what we'll be looking at today. We begin with the days where DreamWorks' logos were just classy and simple. Sure, I do kinda dig the current IP boasting fest that they have going on at the moment, but ultimately this is just better. Classy from the very first frame. From there, we go straight into the world-building intro, the must for any animated movie with such a unique world premise like this one. I mean, to help get young viewers on board, you do need an accessible way of communicating that this is just the world from the off. And in this movie's case, they take the protagonist narration route, followed by a day in the life sequence to set the status quo. And to be fair, Hiccup narrating the opening actually lines up with how the original book opens. Yeah, remember, this is a book. Whilst mostly written in the third person, as most children books typically are, page 1 does feature a note from the hero by Hiccup. Because yes, this is yet another example of DreamWorks' knack for excellent contemporary children's book adaptations based on the books of Cressida Cowell. I've said many times that this is what best sets DreamWorks apart from both Disney and Pixar. You got Disney for the classics, you got Pixar for the original stories and nowadays sequels to those original stories, and then you have DreamWorks adapting modern stories. Hell, this movie's director, Chris Sanders, has just done it again in a big way with The Wild Robot last year. And they do not waste time in getting the concept of this world across.
Most places have mice or mosquitoes. We have dragons.
Immediately, you understand how dragons exist in this world, how the village views them, and Hiccup smoothly brought into that picture. Also, I love how this first movie never needs to go beyond the immediate area surrounding this village. It makes sense that they did go beyond this for the sequels, you know, just to up the stakes here and there, but I love that this first one generally keeps its story in place. In a time when every superhero movie just is pretty much save the world from a nigh-on planet-sized destruction scenario, I'm all for stories like this where this is just one village in the focus. And the dragons, of course. The villagers themselves are also not just painted as murderous dragon hunters in this opening sequence either. From that first sheep being swiped away to half the village being on fire as a normality, made clear that these dragons make life difficult for them, and you can completely understand why they'd be trying to stop that. Even in that opening narration, Hiccup says how the village is ancient, but the buildings are brand new. That sentence is an exceptional piece of storytelling there, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was just straight out of the book. I haven't read it, let's be honest, have you? Another part mentioning that they choose to stay here despite this cataclysmic problem also gives this village a character and speaks to a lot of real-world examples where the exact same thing happens in places. It humanizes the characters just by talking about them. It may be a village of historically inaccurate Vikings dealing with dragons, but those echoes of humanity from the get-go help you to believe in this world. Just after getting all that from the opening alone, we also quickly learn Hiccup's place in the village.
What is he doing out? What are you doing out? Get inside!
He just picks him up like a dog that ran out to a busy road. You're promptly made aware that Hiccup is seen as an obstacle to be kept out of the way of fighting dragons. I also like how you don't immediately get Stoic's relation to Hiccup in this introduction, and is just said to be the mighty leader of the village. Hiccup's admiration for him as he says all this is also just a nice detail on rewatch. Indeed, we learn that Hiccup in fact works for Gobber the Belch in making weapons for the tribe. That's right, the armory is made up of Hiccup and Belch. Pause for laughter, I guess. However, he's not content with this. He wants to get out there and prove himself with a dragon kill. And I love with his intentions, you can tell he's not competent by any stretch. And it is purely in the fact that he's just not physically strong. Usually, with a protagonist in the loser of the community position, we get an incompetent klutz who just suddenly becomes alright on a whim and ends up saving the day anyway. You know, you've seen that kind of movie time and time again. Here, we can see why Hiccup is viewed how he is, but also some genuine abilities that are also being overlooked. In many ways, this movie succeeds in telling the story that Chicken Little failed to do. Embarrassed Dad included, as we'll get to. And although we don't know it at this point, we also get our first view of Toothless in here. Sort of. It's just a cool flash of purple hitting a catapult.
No one has ever killed a Night Fury. That's why I'm gonna be the first.
Ambitious guy. I wonder how that'll turn out. You also get from this introduction the different species of dragons, the extra layer of detail straight from the books that gives authenticity to this world. As we know all too well from the likes of Star Wars and Harry Potter, people absolutely adore that overly thought out layers of lore and mythology. And the world of How to Train Your Dragon has that in spades. I mean, it would have been a misstep to not have thought out the mythology here, considering, you've set this all around a Norse village. One of the best known mythologies in the world. As Gobber goes to help the fight, Hiccup takes the opportunity to sneak out and try out his new catapult, and shock horror, it works. Wonder which dragon he got there. Does it by any chance look like a cross between Stitch and Salem the cat? The one that then finds Hiccup doesn't, anyway. And as Stoic saves him, presumably for the 100th time now, we then get the final bombshell from this opening scene.
Sorry, Dad.
And as any superior version of Chicken Little would, yes, we're sticking with that comparison, Stoic actually has justifications for his concerns. As we just saw, he literally just had to save Hiccup from being killed again.
This isn't a joke, Hiccup.
He's not just being a prized butt-cluck a-hole for no reason. Because from where Stoic's standing, you can understand why Hiccup's proneness to putting himself in danger has led to him writing him off as a dragon killer. There's more to it than just embarrassment, so yeah, go suck it, Chicken Little.
I've never seen anyone mess up that badly.
Jonah Hill playing the douchebag character? Classic. And in the next scene, we have it truly punctuated just where the village stands with these dragons.
Either we finish them or they'll finish us.
Yes, it's a story we've seen a few times before already, but clearly that message still isn't exactly getting across, and I really like this movie's version of it. It's not like you can't understand how they've adopted this attitude. We've literally just seen the village attacked for the 1000th time. This movie prevents misunderstandings on both sides in a way. Except one side does have a giant dictator dragon pulling the strings, but that's by the by. Speaking of which, this is where we're introduced to the concept of a nest, and that the clan knows about it. Following this meeting to exterminate the dragons once and for all, Stoic confides in Gobber about his frustrations with Hiccup. And in a short exchange, we get a great exploration of generational expectations. Again, another classic story to repeat.
Even as a boy, I knew what I was, what I had to become. Hiccup is not that boy.
It's not asking you to agree with where Stoic is coming from, but it just gives an honest insight into his perspective and his relationship with Hiccup, whilst ultimately not making him a super villain either. This is a nuanced argument in this sense of generational expectations. Meanwhile, Hiccup's gone to find the bounty from his catapult. Okay. And indeed, of course, it is the Night Fury. Where to begin? You've got to appreciate that this is an initially wordless scene, yet we completely understand the weight of this moment thanks to all of the world building from earlier. That first dip into the lore of this world wasn't just added in for the sake of it, it's actively added weight to Hiccup's first encounter with the Night Fury here. We know its name and its reputation and have also been shown why, whilst not actively showing what it looks like, which as well is a great way to delay a reveal. Yet as we get to this scene, we know immediately what's going down here. Toothless's introduction is done brilliantly here as well. Since Toothless has become this highly marketable character with all these plush toys, you forget this first introduction here where, despite being bound and injured, is clearly an unquestionably powerful creature. And full credit to the sound design work here too, as through his sounds and breathing alone, you get a full sense of the weight and strength in him. It's to the point I actually made a dedicated scene breakdown from this moment here a good couple years back now. Check it out if you want to hear me ramble about it specifically even more later. And with just a stare, you know Hiccup's not going to be doing any killing today. I think they knew that no one was going to buy into that even being a possibility anyway, so they may as well lean into it. And it's not playing to Hiccup being a weak character either. It's not framed in a way to laugh at him or anything like that. The whole point is to show that he has strength in not killing the dragons. No, instead he cuts him free and seemingly almost dies. And yet, the Night Fury spares him and flies away. Whilst planting the seeds of the central bond that will define the entire franchise, here we get just a showcase of why the Night Fury is seen as this all-powerful creature. Before we're ultimately endeared to Toothless as the kitty-eyed dragon, you need to justify why he's initially viewed as the boss-level dragon that everyone fears. Whilst all he does is scream over Hiccup before flying away, between the visuals and the sound, they absolutely deliver that point home. Having now had a life-altering experience that has set him on a complete 180 on the whole dragon-killing thing, Hiccup is evidently now more content with being a write-off by his dad. Lovely stuff. Shame that all the years of begging his dad to do that thing have now just paid off, with Stoic now insisting that he does training. Hey, when that happens. But it's a great crossroads of both characters changing their tune for different reasons. Stoic once again proves that he'll be a much better father than Buck Cluck will ever be by proving he's willing to meet Hiccup halfway and at least let him try in training. Even with his doubts, he's learned to give his son a chance. If Hiccup's worldview hadn't completely changed like this morning, this would have been a truly heartwarming moment, a real cross against what is usually the generational conflict. However, instead,
I don't want to fight dragons.
What? What are you talking about?
it also proceeds to show that Stoic still isn't particularly on his son's level yet. It can't just be an easy fix immediately, failing to directly respond to anything that Hiccup is actually saying. This is just a great way to do that nuanced generational divide.
Deal?
This conversation is feeling very one-sided.
In thinking he's heard Hiccup out, he's actually not listening at all.
Welcome to dragon training.
No turning back.
That's one thing I get confused about here. They seem to be starting dragon training at the same time, just as Hiccup has just been allowed to join. But I guess Stoic had also just asked Gobber to start the training when he said he had to stay behind to do that, so I guess I can buy it. It just seems like this dragon training facility is all pre-built and ready to go, you know? So I'm just unsure why the others hadn't already trained up until this point, you know? Why is it now school starts for everybody? Was he just begging to join in the next academic year, which happens to be also right now? I guess it's just so everyone stays on the same page as Hiccup, but I can't help but think that them having already done some training would have been an equally interesting situation to balance. To throw newbie Hiccup into it whilst making a bit more sense. Plus, it would show the idea that he's still weaker and behind other people his age. But hey, keep it in sync. It's a nitpick of an excellent movie, you know, it's what I do sometimes. I'm sorry. An interesting thought, though.
The recruit who does best will win the honor of killing his first dragon.
Well, Hiccup's clearly not going to be that guy, so I guess we're free of that situation ultimately backfiring. Thank goodness for that. Here's another bit that's great for comedic effect, but also great for lore building, with the booked up character who knows all the stats being used to illustrate the different types of dragons, and also the clan's understanding of them.
Speed 8, armor 16.
Voiced by McLovin. Of course he is. I like how this just sounds like Pokemon cards at this point. And unlike a lot of these movies where the teacher figure just throws them into it, this time we get something a bit...
I believe in learning on the job.
Yeah, only kidding, he lets the dragons out immediately. To be fair, he is actually teaching at the same time here, instead of just sitting back like most of these character types. And there's more great details about the dragon abilities and weaknesses added by this scene, like how the noise disturbance interferes with them. Nice little foreshadowing for later.
All dragons have a limited number of shots.
And it's these details that feed back to the idea of what an actual how to train your dragon guide would include. Hey, I guess it's also Fantastic Beasts if it was actually good. Though also, isn't it a strange title, How to Train Your Dragon? What a daring title for a movie that's, you know, not at all really a guide apart from elements here and there like this. It's interesting. Marketing. They could never be so daring anymore. And of course, the scene ends with Hiccup almost dying. Again, this movie isn't just giving him character development out of nowhere, people. And I just love this line delivery.
A dragon will always go for the kill.
I know they got Craig Ferguson as the voice as Gobber as primarily a funny character, but he can absolutely deliver the colder, sincere beats as well. That's what makes the best comedy, a good hint of drama, and vice versa. It also gives us our cue to return to the one dragon that didn't go for the kill. Returning to the site where it all went down, Hiccup's more than surprised to discover his capture's still where he found it. As Toothless fails to fly off, it's both our first proper window of empathy into a character, but also adds a layer of believability of this being a living, breathing animal. It echoes much more something you'd see in a nature documentary than an animated dragon based off of a cat. In Jurassic Park, they always made sure to portray the dinosaurs as animals rather than monsters, and here, whilst you've got that monster perspective from the opening scene to empathize with the village, it's now that the story starts enlightening us on the dragon's perspective. I also love that instead of Hiccup actually saying, "Oh look, his tail's broken," this plot point is literally illustrated to us through his sketchbook. Going back to the original book, a lot of the illustrations were made to look like Hiccup had drawn them himself, so it's very fitting that there's a homage to this in the movie that also actively moves the story along, and probably makes more of a justification for the title. That makes sense. That's the role of an illustration after all, so showing the ability to adapt that very book-centric plot device into an actual active part of a movie is incredible. I mean, that's just showing off at this point. Back to the snarky teenager squad, and the offering of the Dragon Manual leads to a line that I can hear most world leaders saying.
Why read words when you can just kill the stuff the words tell you stuff about?
Naturally, other than the know-it-all character who's already read it, everyone discards the book, leaving Hiccup as the one to browse all that sweet, sweet dragon content.
When startled, the thunder drum produces a concussive sound that can kill a man at close range.
Again, this is great stuff for kids that really want to get into the series, but also enriches the world of this movie as a whole. I absolutely love the world building that some movies care to put in the detail for, and I could absolutely consume all of the dragon lore like this. I mean, I was a fan of Piclopedia back in the day. It's probably not a surprise from me. And these details aren't just chucked in there either. You can tell that thought's been put into the functionality of each dragon, which once again does complete justice to the original book. All while still serving the story as we see the book's blank page on Night Furies. The transition here is also just super smooth storytelling, going straight to Hiccup asking about Night Furies during an exercise the very next day, keeping the action going as well as the story. And of course, another dragon with unique, well thought out characteristics. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe if you're interested in more amazing movies. I'm gonna do them all through the year as we do mostly daily uploads, so come join if you want to see the smorgasbord of animated movie content. Alright, back to the second half of the video.
I'm really beginning to question your teaching methods.
I also like that none of the students are exactly competent here. Hiccup clearly struggles more than the rest of them, but the fact that none of them are exactly the prodigy of the tribe is kind of refreshing to see. As much as I was saying they should have done the reverse earlier, I guess that is a cliche of its own sort. Because honestly, it feels more believable character-wise that none of these kids would be ready for it yet. They're all kids. Astrid's clearly the most confident of the bunch, but even she's kept grounded as a trainee rather than being inexplicably overpowered. They do, however, do the classic two romantic leads fall on top of each other, an element of its time.
Love on the battlefield.
She could do better.
Kind of unnecessary, but it does follow with a key line.
Figure out which side you're on.
Cut to Hiccup feeding his dragon. And once again, the subtleties in his mannerisms and behavior are arguably the best W of the animation here. It's in these silent, essentially dialogueless scenes where How to Train Your Dragon 1 really shines. And I don't think anyone disagrees. That's not a puppet made of pixels, that's a living, thinking animal somehow. And yeah, it's at this point that he starts to become a bit cute in this bit, and hey, we all lap it up. Cut to the line.
Toothless.
And this animation isn't just copying real-world animal behaviors, though clearly cats are a big one. They keep the fact that this is a dragon first and foremost and what behaviors one would have. Heating up the ground with its fire breath to make a warm bed. Of course that would be in its nature to do. It's just so well thought out. And on to the defining moment perhaps in the whole franchise. It's what they've already teased in the live-action versions trailer. Because, you know, just remaking the same iconic scene beat for beat suddenly makes it good, apparently. It's the moment Hiccup and Toothless form their eternal bond. The whole ritual to it just has some true whimsy to it, as well as sincerity behind that whimsy, right from Toothless making a pathway for Hiccup to follow. This is a movie taking itself seriously, something DreamWorks only sometimes does. The comic relief characters and gags are in there, of course they are, but the movie never prioritizes that over the story it's telling. The comedy bits serve the story, rather than the story just being a platform for gags. It's what makes How to Train Your Dragon stand out from a lot of the other DreamWorks fare. It's why this is the one DreamWorks movie that has been treated as plausible to work in live action. I love Shrek, but for the love of God, a live action version of that is something that just doesn't have legs. It would just be CGI again. They'd make a toothless Shrek CGI monstrosity, without the good accent probably as well.
I've got this one, laddie.
Neither do we need a photorealistic Madagascar.
No, 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 no.
No, we really don't.
Swimming back to New York!
This movie just has something different to it, and it's not just the concept and the lore established by an elongated writing process in the form of telling a book with much more world building and care and longevity to it. It's this core relationship and this magical sequence that completely sells you on it without a single passage of dialogue. That, my friends, is cinema. So back to Gobber and the gang.
He took my hand and swallowed it whole.
I had no idea this scene was foreshadowing on the first watch. More on that later. Also, gotta love that they're all just casually eating a whole bird each. Fair play. I know that level of hunger. The UK economy ain't great. It's also here where Gobber mentions
A downed dragon is a dead dragon.
which sets up Hiccup on his next problem. Step 1, draw the thing you rubbed out again. Step 2, Iron Man looking shot of welding your idea together. Step 3, lay the different bits on a scale drawing, which honestly is probably a pretty good idea. I want to see some houses built with that logic. I also love that the movie never has Hiccup explain himself as he develops into caring for Toothless and the dragons. It's not until later he actually vocalizes his perspective. Through his actions alone, we just understand what he's doing and why he's doing it. We don't need him to spell out why he's making and fitting Toothless a replacement tail wing. I can't help but think though that it's kinda handy for Hiccup that he's the one who can puppet the tail. Pretty sure there's some kind of scrap that could have allowed Toothless more control of it themselves, but whatever, he was going to be dependent on Hiccup fixing it every time it broke from this point on anyway, so it's fine. The stages of Toothless getting his flight back is really smartly placed as well, being peppered between the dragon fighting classes. They give proper time to the training element of how to train your dragon. Who'da thunk? Introducing more dragons along the way, I think this two-headed one's concept is particularly creative.
One head breathes gas, the other head lights it.
It's also in this sequence we start to see Hiccup's time with Toothless impact his performance in classes. Obviously, his solutions to managing these dragons' issues are peaceful ones, but to actually demonstrate them working in this otherwise warmongering world in creative ways leads a great example to younger viewers. In this world of dragons and Vikings, it's an impressive feat to make the protagonist seem cool for learning to diffuse situations peacefully. So much of our media has heroes just punching every enemy in the teeth, and it's just cool to see a movie that gives us a different kind of hero to that. It's a role model kids of today need to see right now, so hopefully this live action movie will do some good. Is that the take I'm going on? This is perhaps my personal favorite sequence in the movie, going between these adaptations to riding and training Toothless and Hiccup then using what he's learnt to absolutely school the other children. Although, rewatching it, Hiccup helping Toothless to fly, particularly with the wind endurance exercise, does make me think that Chris Sanders kind of recycled this sequence a bit in The Wild Robot. Just a little bit.
Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
But anyway, it's a great sequence showing the natural steps of Hiccup learning and adapting. We love a well-executed progress sequence. And by the time Stoic has returned, Hiccup is the talk of the town in a beat that feels totally earned. Way more than Chicken Little just getting lucky in a baseball game. Screw that guy.
He has this way with the beasts.
And that iconic theme kicking in, it's all capped off with the first big flight sequence. Still managing those original book-adjacent touches of Hiccup having the different tail positions noted down, this sequence is of course great in its own right. However, the prior build-up of how we got here is what really makes it sing. There's energy and intensity to the action as well. Not only can you see the visceral wind resistance in Toothless's wings, but I swear you can see the camera shake against it too. Pretty impressive considering, there isn't a camera. The notes are also used as a symbolic moment in Hiccup's character journey. Initially almost losing flight in pursuit of saving his notes, he then ultimately tosses them away. He can trust his instincts now, and that's just immaculate. From here, we also get this short moment to make clear that Toothless isn't the only misunderstood dragon here.
Everything we know about you guys is wrong.
Also, it's a tiny dragon wanting to cuddle. What's not to love? Time for another father-son miscommunication scene. Our favorite.
All those years of the worst Viking Burke has ever seen.
To be fair, those other kids weren't doing much better. When exactly did this performance review start? Like when he was 8? Of course, Stoic is convinced Hiccup is now a bona fide dragon slayer. But also, this line here is one that I think is particularly sad the longer you think about it.
We finally have something to talk about.
Probably the most buck-cluck thing he says in the whole movie. And as we head towards the climax, he ends up doing a lot worse. However, the thing is, movies are allowed to tell stories with flawed father figures. That's a big part of the intrigue of this story. However, a big part of that is the world these characters live in and his father's position in that world. This isn't a buck-cluck situation where he's just generally embarrassed about his son not fitting in and effectively being part of the problem. This is a dragon-scorched Viking village where life's a lot more brutal. So in that regard, clearly it's just far superior a way of doing the buck-cluck-esque storyline. No competition there. Anyway, before these factors send Stoic into full vengeance mode, we first get the female lead finds out the truth scene. Again, one of the more formulaic beats in the movie, but it's still executed very well. I like them holding Astrid to an ultimatum by holding her in a tree. Cue the quippy line I remember seeing in the trailer for some reason.
Thank you for nothing, you useless reptile.
And then the subsequent scene is visually stunning, kind of harkening back to the whole new world sequence in Aladdin, except no songs needed to communicate the emotions in this scene. The filmmakers are smart enough to know what's self-evident on screen, even though initially all they had to go by was storyboards to plan that all out. And that's not to say there's no music in this scene, because man, that score is great in this scene as well. All the same wonder all new world has, but no lyrics required. And then we see the nest. As it turns out, all the dragons are stealing stuff from the Vikings as they are at the mercy of an even gianter dragon. Sure, I think there's a version that didn't need this much extra element suddenly chucked in there, and the conflict is just a genuine misunderstanding between the dragons and the Vikings, but at the end of the day, this big bad dragon makes for a solid final battle sequence, so I can't complain too much. What's also great from this sudden reveal is the dilemma it poses for Hiccup and Astrid. You understand how, having just discovered the thing the tribe have been searching after for generations, why Astrid's instincts is to tell Stoic. But then her ultimately agreeing to keep it a secret whilst Hiccup thinks over spilling the beans in his own terms is a key moment of growth for her character. On to the bit no one enjoys for all the right reasons, it's time for everything to go wrong. And the whole thing's framed so well, cutting between Hiccup's actions and Stoic's interpretations of them. You can see how both characters come to the conclusions that they do, and that moment of it all almost working is so perfectly frustrating. It's Thanos' glove almost coming off as Star-Lord punches him. This moment has that kind of energy, and Stoic is very much the Chris Pratt of the situation. And whilst it's somewhat convenient that Toothless now just has an instinct of Hiccup being in peril, it does add a layer of depth to their bond. And as Stoic leads the wrestling of Toothless to the ground, you can just hear the shadows of the children crying at this moment. You can tell they've brought you into this being a living creature because your gut response to this moment is just like as if you were watching an actual animal being restrained like this. Almost as gutting as this line from Stoic.
You've thrown your lot in with them. You're not my son.
It's so cold, yet so emotional in the delivery, and completely justifies casting Gerard Butler to bring that gravitas to the moment. To him, this isn't just a matter of Hiccup disappointing him, this is Hiccup betraying the village for the enemy. It's powerful stuff, and I'm not going to undercut it by making yet another dig at Buck Cluck over here. The framing of this scene as well, Hiccup on the ground with his father's shadow literally towering over him. And that's the central conflict of the movie. I don't care what giant dragon MacGuffin they want to throw in there. Rallying the boats, Stoic has Toothless bound and loaded onto the ship to be used as a compass to the nest. It's obviously cruel, but I like how even this detail has strategy and reason behind it. This is a really fascinating world, even in its darker moments. As they part, we get Hiccup's moment of doubt, which plays out like it does in a lot of movies, but hey, it still works. And it does put a punch on the message here, Hiccup finally vocalizing why he's gone the path that he has. And perhaps by restraining his perspective this whole time, it has all the more weight to finally hear it now.
I wouldn't kill him because he looked as frightened as I was.
Meanwhile, there is clearly some doubt amongst the army in Stoic's brash rollout to the nest. And for good reason, as it of course all immediately goes to pot.
No matter how this ends, it ends today.
And then they all died. No, of course not, but it sure looked like that for a moment. And as much of a skeptic as I've been on this big bad dragon's involvement, They at least absolutely nail the level of threat here. The roar blasting out of the cave and rattling the boat before we even have a full view of it. You immediately know that these guys are in trouble. Even the design of the mouth shape has a horrific Lovecraftian twang to it. All capped off with a devastating fire breath that is absolutely exceptionally animated. You could place that shot into a live action movie and it looked great. They're doing that. And even at this point where Stoic has been at his most unlikable, we are reminded that he is ultimately a selfless leader and a good man, expressing to Gobber that he will buy the men some time. He may be a semi-confrontative villain-esque character, but he's a leader for a reason. And oftentimes, that kind of character beat has way more layers than your average animated movie. And giving us some greater insight into the two characters' bond, we then get...
Then I can double that time.
It's a quick moment, but it's such a good one for both of these characters. Luckily for our old, stupid Stoic, Hiccup's showing the douchebags he's been putting up with for the whole movie how to fly the dragons. It's time for all the third act payoff, people, and this movie doesn't disappoint. Even just having the twin characters on the two-headed dragon. Love that. And of course, having been absolutely defeated, Stoic having no choice but to see his sons approach in action and accepting that he was right, the emotional payoff is what sells the action here. And they demonstrate this pivotal point of the relationship in the best way possible. They don't go straight to the, "you were right, son" kind of moment. Instead, as the ship with Toothless on it sinks, they have Stoic show his respect for Hiccup by diving in and saving them himself. And for a character defined by being the heroic leader of the village, this line still feels like his bravest moment in the movie.
I'm sorry. For everything.
Oh, it's so good. On to the final showdown and we're in for some solid Night Fury action. We love to see it. The speed, the power strike. You can see why kids eat this stuff up. And it's only made all the more satisfying as we haven't really seen this at all since the very start of the movie. By having such elongated setup, seeing the Night Fury at its weakest point slowly brought back up to its prime status is what really brings this whole movie together. And I feel like a lot of movies nowadays, they don't do the setup. Every movie crushes down the slow parts that I think makes a movie like this the first film of a full trilogy at its absolute best. You need the slow moments, the low moments to make these high highs as high as they are, because this, mwah, chef's kiss. And it's funny I mentioned the Iron Man reference earlier, as this moment kind of also echoes the finale of that film, as they trick the big guy into the clouds, all completed by a classic false death finale.
I did this.
And yet, even then, it does serve as an important moment in Stoic's character journey. He may have accepted that Hiccup was right, but here he gets a full dose of the consequences of his actions that he could have brought. Of course, Toothless saved Hiccup, and whilst I still class this as a false death moment, I'm glad that they didn't just go for a classic lifeless body followed by sudden coughing routine. Every time I see that, it's like someone's being knocked out and then come round as if they've just had CPR. It makes no sense. Why are you coughing when you wake up again? Anyway, this movie doesn't do that, and better still, there is still some consequences to Hiccup putting himself on the line. As he has his Frodo waking up in bed moment, Toothless in his room and all, we soon discover that Hiccup has lost part of his leg. And obviously, that's got an element of symbolism in there, with Toothless almost having the exact missing appendage of sorts. But there's also a real theme of limb loss and disability that we'll probably explore more in the sequel as it becomes a little bit more apparent. Hiccup's only just lost it at the very end of the movie, but I think there's a real interesting theme there about overcoming your limitations and overall not letting it get you down. Great for representation, even if it's because of brutal Viking timeline stuff. It's still very cool to see because, you know, it's not exactly the default character design. And we finish off with the dragons and Vikings coexisting together and setting up some solid Vikings riding dragons for the sequel. Or you could just say it is the perfect full circle from the very start of the movie. Hiccup wanted to change to fit into the village, but staying true to himself, the village changed because of him. Lovely stuff. I absolutely love this movie. We will absolutely be covering How to Train Your Dragon 2 and 3 in future amazing episodes this year. And yes, no doubt I'll probably go and see the live-action remake as well, but come on, they're not actually going to be able to top this level of quality, no matter how good and photorealistic it looks. Sometimes animation just can tell stories better than live action. The best you can do really is copy. This movie remains to be a modern animated classic, And that was DreamWorks' amazing How to Train Your Dragon 1. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Tell me your thoughts on the trilogy as a whole, the live action, or hey, maybe I'll cover the TV series at some point. And I shall see you all in a little bit.